All right, and since there's this little silence, I think it's a good moment to begin. And I'm going to invite Elder Joe Michael, who has kindly brought our guest Liz Howard up to Acadia today, so he's going to offer a little welcome.
Go away, Liz. Liz in Mi'kmaq, I was telling what's coming down was Sabbath. That's her, want to be here in Mi'kmaq. Each time Adrian or Cynthia brings a guest down, I find that I'm connected to them a little bit more. And today was no exception. It started the minute I arrived in Halifax. My window broke, and I said, okay, but I got to pick up Liz. So I phoned her, and she said, no problem, very patiently. And then on our way down, and this glass company didn't roll one of my windows all the way up. And noisy, and I rolled the window, I was noisy. And she said, maybe she's mad at me for picking her up late. She kept hollering at me. But on that side, you couldn't hear nothing. But anyway, I stopped alongside the road and I made a tobacco off into the spirits, and I took out Scotch tape and fixed it all up. But anyway, we had a good time. It started from the time that I picked up the hotel, and we were talking and, telling about Mi'kmaq territories and all this stuff. And anyway, we should pull a trick on Andrea. We should tell her we're about 12 miles from Yarmouth. Well, that came back and bit us, me anyway. I looked at the thing there, and we're going the wrong way. We're 11 miles from the airport. We had to turn around. So we were like Bonnie and Clyde. We had to break the law, go across the medium. And of course, on traffic coming on there. So anyway, we did good. We're bond quite a bit now, So anyway, if I go down, she's going down, but I'll take it. She said. But anyway, I want to welcome you, Liz, to the Mi'kmaq unceded territory. Some good things I heard about your poems, stuff like that. It comes from the heart. As we spoke coming down, even during our lunch and stuff like that. The audience there, I see they'll take it, and I really, really appreciate you coming down and sharing it. And Liz is Ojibwe, Mishabi tribe. So I even told her that the Ojibwe and the Mi'kmaq, they almost had the same language or the same culture, a sense of humor and stuff like that, which is good, But that I want to pass over back to Andrew now. And thank you for in our territory, and you're always welcome at Andrea's.
It's really good because then he got stuck in my driveway too. So I would like to begin by saying that I acknowledge that Canada's First Peoples are the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I stand on, and this is a nice global statement kind of for the country that I learned from Patty Labucan Benson, because it's at the end, it's at the bottom of her email for the Native Counseling Services of Alberta, and we've been sort of struggling to decide what will be the territorial acknowledgement that we use at Acadia, and that is still very much in progress, but I quite like that broad statement because it just says it very clearly, but I think it's also important to get a little bit more specific. So those seats that you're sitting in at the K.C. Irving Center at Acadia University is, as I learned today, and I'm going to try to say this correctly, you are sitting in Debiac Debidet. Did I do that okay? So this is the place of plenty of potatoes, which is not really what it says in the Acadia Protocol Handbook about what the region is, but it's a way of expressing basically the place that we are in. And this district is one of 7 districts that make up Mi'kma'ki, which is the land that the Ilnu have been in relationship with for over 14,000 years, or to put that sort of more poetically in preparation for a poetry reading since time immemorial, I think says it very well. And the town of Wolfville, it seems, was formerly known as Mud Creek, and perhaps was also formerly known before that as Muntabon, which means the place of catfish, the mud catfish place. I also want to acknowledge that there's an awful lot for me to learn, and there's a lot for all of us to learn about this place and its peace and friendship treaties, and what that means for each and every one of us living here, because we are all treaty people, and we have to learn how to enact those responsibilities. There's a lot of talk these days about these buzzwords: reconciliation, decolonization, indigenization. But there's also a lot of fear and distraction that is hindering the communications and seem to be preventing us or causing obstructions for us to get onto the healing path that Mother Earth so urgently needs us to walk. And art is a way of imagining new worlds and new ways, and poetry is a salubrious medicine of sound, syntax, spirit, and silence, imparted in a language we both know and do not know. As Wittgenstein says, what makes a subject difficult to understand, if it is significant and important, is not that some special instruction about abstruse things is necessary to understand it. Rather, it is the contrast between the understanding of the subject and what most people want to see. Some of that learning will come about tonight, and I encourage all of you here to take the words and images and metaphors for change out into the world and into your own think tents to help work the transformation that the two-eyed seeing and astonishment of Liz Howard's poetry invokes, so that we might all come to honor our relationship with the lands and the water and the air and the creatures and all the plants, and with each other as humans. My favorite line from Wittgenstein, and I have read a little bit, but I must admit I haven't read a whole lot, but I love this line, and it seems fitting. He says, "Astonishment is essential to a change in aspect, and astonishment is thinking." And Liz Howard's work is absolutely astonishing, as is her life story, so we are incredibly honored and lucky to have her with us here tonight. She was born and raised on Treaty 9 territory. She comes from Chapleau in Northern Ontario, and I was quite thrilled to realize I know another poet from Chapleau in there, and that is Armand Garnot-Ruffo, who we had also the great privilege of having here a couple of years ago. She came south to study neuroanatomy and neuroscience and physiology and psychopathology for her BSc, and from there she went on and did an MFA in creative writing. She is now a Toronto-based poet whose poetry has appeared in numerous journals, such as the Capilano Review, the Puritan, and Matrix Magazine, among others. Her chapbook, Skull Ambient, published by Furno House, was a finalist in the BP Nicol Chapbook Award in 2012. She works as a research officer in cognitive psychology and does research on aging brains at the University of Toronto. And since she became both the youngest winner of the Griffin Poetry Prize and the first winner with a debut book for her collection, The Infinite Citizen of the Shaking Tent, which was also shortlisted for the 2015 Governor General's Award, she also devotes some daytime hours to her writing work. Her poetry peers praise her gestalt-shifting prosody, metaphor, and language and vision. Penguin, the publisher, says, "A stunning debut book of poems from a bold new voice, unafraid to engage with the exigencies of our contemporary world." Quill and Choir reviewer Natalie Zina-Walshutz says, "There is a gravity, a certainty to the way Howard inhabits these words and phrases that lends her writing a profound authority." Stevie Howell, another poet who was once here, said, "Infinite Citizen of the Shaking Tent is one of the most distinct, uncompromising, and rewarding books of Canadian poetry in recent memory." Selena Bone from Prism International says Howard's work invites disruption, dreams, vulnerability. I return to her work often for its attention to texture, breath, and fierce engagement with decolonization and feminism. And I could go on, and I actually have more quotations, but I think I will stop there and just leave you with something that Liz herself said to Rob McLennan in 2015. She said, calls her novel a part. She said, it's a party, a seance, a powwow, a wake. It is the most earnest and joyful thing I have ever done. So let us joyfully welcome Liz tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea and Joe, for those wonderful words and welcomings. And I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you all for your attention and attendance tonight. And I'm going to read you a few poems from my book and also some more recent work. And then I think there's going to be some time for some questions at the end. So please, if you have any questions, I'd love to receive them from you. So this first poem is Terra Nova Terraformed. Spent shale, thigh haptic fissure, row, river, delta of sleep-inducing peptides abet our tent. In a deep time course, in Venus retrograde, we coalesced into the Cartesian floral pattern of heritage where I hunt along a creek as you pack bits of bone away within a system of conservation. The site was discovered during construction of a new Venice highway for stars birthing themselves out of pyroclastic dust and telepathy in the time zone of some desperate hour when all our exits are terraformed. Sons and daughters of the liberal arts, all my life has spurned a desire for more than a power line of injured transistors, fetal alcohol syndrome, oil drums sunk to the bottom of every lake, the aurora borealis, an overdose along the magnetized pole. What we are offered in lieu of a soul, another paper cut of lambent plasma, thickening the womb bed of release. Oh, creek, bleeding hills, census inveterate, let me sleep 5 more minutes, just 5 minutes more before we default on eternity. Lookbook. Over there on the green lawn, under a sick pine, is the body of the bird, his plumage blue, when I go to look at him and wonder if he's dead. But his chest sort of heaves, so I bend down closer. Look how the breast of the bird splits open, and a fist of maggots spills out on the grass. A necklace of sticky pearls in peristalsis ribbed and shining in the July light. Invertebrates that form an anecdote before I go back into our clapboard house to look at the Sears catalog and dream I am a girl posed into happiness. Look at me here now in this new dress I've bought with my own money at age 20 in the city. When the cops question me, I flash my passport thinking of lichen inching down a branch of a tree over the town river when I was small. And somewhere my birth father is drunk and homeless, half mad when the cops ask for his name, he'll say December. And this poem is a longer poem that contains the title of my book, which is Infinite Citizen of the Shanking Tent. And it's called Think Tent. And it begins with a quote by the European philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein that Andrea referenced. And the quote is, which I always found sort of hilarious. He says, "I am my world, the microcosm." Hospitality, the first demand. What is your name? The city bound me, so I entered, to dream a science that would name me daughter, and launch beyond grief, the old thoracic cause, myocardium, a blood orange foundry handed down by the humoral anatomists, and not to be inside my own head perpetually, not simply Wittgenstein's girl, but an infinite citizen in a shaking tent. If you are in need of an answer, consult a Jisaki Winini, scientific rigor, psychoanalysis, the unconscious, a construct, method amphibious of two minds. That's the translator. Her task to receive the call that comes down the barrel of the future. All of us, a congress of selves, a vibrational chorus. I know myself to be a guest in your mind, a grand lodge of everything I long to know and hold. Within this potlatch we call the present moment. If I speak of the night, speak its illicit cerebrum of branches and back seats. Speak beyond our future, a thinkable urn. My empirical training, my non-status brow ridge, indivisible and glistening, every time I tease a thread of being from its moment in standard time. Let's elevate the coordinates of distress. Take it all in, I'm all in and over the limit, the eliminative, the lumens, the mens rea, the loom. To be a shopkeep in the showroom of nouns, what to purchase and what to disavow. Speak with saffron, speak of just the small bits, atomic. Speak of the inevitable curve in the data, all foreclosed upon and glimmering like a good bitch in the brine of night. I haven't nearly enough heat here in this stakeout. The sky died, and I'm its anima in the pitch thickets. I have fingers with which to squish, pin cherries and rose hips. Dogwood, I have begun to hear a rosary of pure tones. The colony, hear its call toward disorder. Citizens, I have never been dishonest in my horror. The underclass of our era, a requisite paternity test, dominus in excelsis. Our foisted self-addendum was called against our lack of surprise. Everything that always happens as it happens to you. In the soiled ledger of our days, I know you know, we are forever evident. In our swampy coda of tending the land is its own belonging to itself. In a laboratory of thought, lifting paper cups of black foam up to our mouths. Without cameras, everything becomes the fringe of our interior. Affect is an aid to cognition, shameless in its missionary position of standard time. Another day unmoored from its twin, hysterical about music, our ontogeny, an iterative gasket. I knew it as a sphere flinched in my portal vein, thickening and bleating and posturing. All that happened upon the digital. Sidestep the distinction. Bless it, unfettered, the open stone's face. It was as if we almost knew, but then the scene changed, a false shore above the original. And now I'm going to move to one of the earliest sections in the book that actually is from what was the chapbook, Skull Ambient, that was published in 2011. So this sort of represents some of the earlier work for me. That's re-edited. And this is called Psychogeography. The beginning of it sort of represents the Anishinaabe migration story, in which 1,000 years ago, the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe originally lived in the Maritimes and migrated following a vision of the Medjay shell and migrated along the sort of St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes region. And also references Nanabosho or Nanabush, who is sort of a trickster, kind of like us, almost like sort of like a Christ-like figure. And in this poem, there's sort of like an interplay between direct speech and language play, and between, I guess, city life and rural life. Psychogeography. From New Brunswick to Sault Ste. Marie, Boating, and northwest I came into being with jackpine thieves and the heronry. Like Nanabosho, I lost my vision to a covenant of ducks in vertigo, whipped a birch to mark my name. South of the Fortune Cookie Factory on the street where I lived, I lost the nerve to speak. Stereotaxic, I had the stomach of an ox, ruminative pulse. It's always one and the same thing. Just north of here, down in the ravine, a friend saw a man burying another in the earth before dawn. One midnight I rose to guide my hand over the hide of a black bear hit by a blue pickup on 129. Tectonic mandibles, palpable gulls, highway silt, fetal cells, resin of a loathsome pine, these remains in the cellar my grandmother numbered. Westward I tried it. My relations splitting cedar planks for the sauna is about my inheritance of base pairs toward the substance of some arrival. Walking always this man I call Dostoevsky, walking his long coat and old shoes, walking who is a man, who is beautiful, whose liver is diseased. A girlhood ahead of dandelion ozone, a camp called the Sublime where several minute species congregated the velvet stereopsis. Coyote was this young man in the convenience store holding a piece of raw liver out to his friend. Or was this White Crow in Fort Francis after the hunt? I made love to a man, lost his rib in poison ivy. There was a collective, juvenilia, and to be a woman was to be lost. So I hugged my ribs and laughed. Copper dissidents, or a fallow deer, so rabbits speak with relevance here and curtsy your superlative name, Agnosia. I slept in voices of smoke by the basement wood stove, in our house by the cemetery, to be small and dreaming parallel to ceremony and decay. I found the body of a fur trader in the hunt shack back there in those woods, where I guarded him like a treasure. Before I left Chapleau for the city, which vets me scientifically, and by its shadows also, a false shore above the original. Dearest ones, please know, I'll do my best not to die young in Toronto. And throughout this book, there's a lot of mirroring that goes on and sort of looping and cyclical reuse, recombination of language, of phrases, of themes. And this poem here is almost sort of like a sister poem or a kind of mirroring poem of Think Tent. So you'll hear a lot of repeated phrases or themes in this piece. And this I'm gonna close the book with this piece and move on to some newer stuff. I'll apologize, my voice is kind of starting to. Sound a little strained. So this is north by south. Was as if I really knew, but then the dream changed. Stalactites under Mexico become the show ponies of our thrownness, gradually turning into an estuary of blood and soy. Blessed, unfettered, the open stones face. There are more totem moments where the stars have drunk the ocean. On a self-similar confessional flight path over the northern hemisphere, this account of light, as an acquired characteristic, became propositional, just as every forest would come to speak to us as a verb. Sweet citizen, I know you as I know myself, a fictive province of selves within Doppler range. O body sensate, your telepathy so impatient. Soon you'll know hope is no nutrient, no last word on forgiveness. Opiate moment, unlatch the skull of a lake from your trophy of red snow. We're in this for the killing fields of every biome. Prosperity, a glittering dryad, felled on the horizon. If there are poems inside the camel, brush its hump with simple syrup. Ants come and eat the flesh away. Poetry evaporates from the wound. Your boots fill with milk. In the lecture theater, the poets stand with their camels. We had no words. Our faces became indistinguishable. Is this an indigenous or occidental dream? Note the presence of wildlife, anxiety about money. We stand at the lectern of origin. We stand here not only to be counted. I felt I needed to walk far out into the woods, through the woods to a river, and walk upon the waters of that river, dissolving. And the silt of me returns to Hudson's Bay, to the Arctic Ocean, is dispersed further into the Beaufort Sea I often dreamt of when small, napping beside a book of maps. In another dream, it's evening. I'm to photograph 3 women who face me with their babies, bundled in their arms. Poet, scientist, Anishinaabe, smile at me, and one by one, the babies explode into flames. That same year, I sat looking out of the living room window at a boulder across the street. A glacial erratic split into 3 pieces by the growth of 2 birch trees. I remember when that stone was whole, my mother said behind me. This is what life does. In a tradition, not quite ablated by pox, TB, and or Christ, the dreaming self, as corporeal in its endeavors, as in a waking state, I go somewhere, into a kind of felicity, unforgiving. Taking our birth names, we headed south, vaulting the tractionless sphagnum for a credit card. Our only limit will be of language. My carry-on could be your carry-on, only I am not a corpse, but a citizen. I tie a knot around the throat of all knowledge, insist I know where my body was when the earth retired from intimacy. When presented with history in the form of an ellipsis, I must continue. Feral I enter the court of words, December of my mind, launched toward more than NORAD knows of the taiga. So that is it for the book. And I'll read some more current work. And you may find more recent stuff is written in a more plain-spoken style, or more direct. I'm going to read 3 pieces. The middle piece is a little more disruptive, but still I've been working or attempting to work more at the level of the sentence are almost in the form of letters. And actually, this piece that I'm going to read to you is actually is adapted from a letter that I wrote to my friend. Actually, the last time that I was in Nova Scotia, the first time I was in Nova Scotia, which I was present for the passing away of my birth father. And this piece contains a quote or a reference to Karl Ove Knausgaard, who was fairly well known a few years ago. He's a Norwegian writer whose autobiographical series of novels under the title My Struggle was fairly well known a while ago. And the first installment of that, A Death in the Family, dealt with in part with his dealing with the loss of his father to alcoholism. So this is titled Knausgaard, Nova Scotia. I just walked the street of my father. The street is called North. I paused in front of his white apartment building as the sun fed me from the west. There were 2 shopping carts chained together, one from the liquor store. My father turned empty bottles into full ones, into food and into rent. He pushed his cart across the city, gathering emptiness. North is the repository of our best intentions. Ursa Major overhead when I am exactly this old, in a winter without fathers. He left when I was an infant to take on liquid. He took himself away. A cosmic stone cast into this ancestral wind I cannot afford. The Pleiades still know me, 7 sisters who know me to be as bold as a conjectured fjord. As I write this in a Tim Hortons, a man next to me asks, "What does this word mean?" pointing to a spot on the page of a Maclean's where the word rapport appears. My father's skin had yellowed, and the sclerae of his eyes, half open but clouded by sedation. A tear slid from the corner of his right eye to pass the bone of his indigenous cheek. This tear had not yet dried when they began to withdraw life support, machine by machine. The breathing machine that jerked his head back and expanded his chest with decreasing regularity was the last to be withdrawn. A nurse said, "He is in the process of actively dying now." Actively dying. In the ancient Near East, a seer would look to the stars or the livers of sheep for divination. What does a liver show or hold? Spurina, the Haruspex, foresaw the death of Caesar in the entrails of a sacrifice. Pagok, the cursed Anishinaabe skeleton who flies through the boreal forest, is said to consume the livers of his victims. Prometheus's punishment for stealing fire from the gods was to be chained to a rock and have his liver torn out daily by an eagle. Every night his liver would regenerate. 2 days have now passed. 2 days I have been in Halifax. 2 days since my father has passed. He has passed from mystery into appearance, laying bare his totality on a deathbed. Cirrhotic belly and ethereally beautiful face. He passed from unknowing into eternity as I watched the neon lines above him lay flat. I am still watching. I still do not know what I know. A nor'easter now passing over me, spilling its moisture from the Atlantic. Heavy rain that by midnight may turn to snow. What does it mean to actively die, actively? At this time, Knausgaard is very much with me. Quote, "For the heart, life is simple. It beats for as long as it can, then it stops. Full stop as in a period is a flat line extended. I have been given my father's papers, his Polaroids, and a pocket watch that belonged to my great-grandfather. I have been given his ball cap, that kept the maritime sun out of his eyes as he scavenged for bottles. The band of this hat has collected his scent, which is lemongrass, earth, and discount smoke. I have been given his small tools, cologne, nail clippers, a water canister, a small plastic box of razors, a picture of me as a baby, a drawing of electrical currents, a knife. I'm here wedged within 3 nor'easters. The first fell after he died. The jaundice, the eyes that are mine, the snow a whiteout of every street. The third will come Tuesday and cover Halifax in a foot of lace. Today I bought Ocean by Sue Goyette, a black dress and a pair of tights. Today I ate berries and drank black coffee. Today I felt the harbor folding in. A sphere flinched in my portal vein. Today I woke up late. This evening I looked up at the constellation Orion. Tomorrow I will see my father's body for the last time. Tuesday he will become ash actively. And this next piece came out in just this December in Poetry Magazine, which comes out of Chicago, which is pretty exciting. I did a Canadian feature, so I was really happy to be included in that. And this is a poem. I suppose I couldn't have given them a more complicated poem to publish. The title of it couldn't be farther from English, really. It's called Euro Anishinaabe Kwe Noli Turbare. Euro Anishinaabe Kwe, referring to my personal ancestry, being of European and Ojibwe Anishinaabe descent, and the suffix Kwe meaning woman, and then Noli Turbare being Latin for do not disturb, which references a quote in the poem itself. And I'll just read it for you. And then after this, there's one sort of sequential poem, and then we'll do questions. Beauty is my irreparable, and today I became geometric. A faux linear figure that distills a skipped trace of first principles. In a whiteout of Atlantic snow, banging stars into the ephemeral vein of Euclid, while rows of lavender circuits, all porous, surrounded me. I genuflected before the hospital parking of my father's jaundice, for I am a good daughter of the colony which begot the immortal heart of the markets. Resource nursed all young bucks of the florets, a liquidity I should service or else receive a lesser dessert. With my smudge cleanse at the ready, I find myself dispensing with the usual future haunt of stability, a survival signaling my relationship to time, or I'm out of it entirely. Chanting hell as hair veils my face, as if this is a Western. Come polygon and I circumvent the disaster. Do not disturb my circles. Holy I went, holy all around my head. The holy I am went careening down the back stairs of this low-rise rental. Striated by the pinnacle light of this city that has my blood pooled purple at the center of its gravity. You can scan the ground from overhead for death pits. I read this on the internet when I was dehydrated, lonely, and afraid. Office plants, all broadleaf repositories for cognition's patent heart. I've gone and been abominable. A column extended from the top of my head into heaven. At the edges of my system, an Anishinaabeg or Indo-European projection of words my nerves could translate into the crawl space of animal magnetism. White pine verticals send us up as a stomach pumped by filial love. Oh, inconsequent curb of my street, I refuse to kneel. This day like any other, a cousin charged with trafficking. Still waiting to be ordained, I make a mask of our features that are retreating. Plush pockets of rust about another falsehood of water, a creek that pleats. I've gone and got a blister. That summer, a black bear's muzzle was coated in shellac from the aerosol can she bit through on my mother's porch. A half century after, my grandmother's mother said, "Don't ever shoot a black bear. They are my people." So I continue to speak more than this mortuary sunrise where I'm only just alive. But Joe, today is over. And this last poem just came out of the Capilano Review, which is a really excellent literary magazine comes out of the West Coast, Vancouver. And this is called This Nocturne When Summer, a series of cosmic missives. Expectant ions in the wettest summer on record, having neither God nor country nor countenance, I should project these teethings of me into the heronry. Little clusters of rust coagulate my veins, such is the feeling. Blessed heart, the mind's gavel, garret, gutter, skunk, priceless. Without cost or origin, what I take into my mouth, the sanctity of night, everything that must be thrown out, your head beside your name, I sweat and cry in taxis. Give me hell. Give me your worst purse of labile offerings, lost origins, organs darkening under the liquid sap of days, tapping, courage's gilded casket, a series of tasks, ontogenetic pearls of unending drive. Sometimes I find myself horrid like Proust, like Kafka or Nanabush, given to moods and vapors and sickness, what cannot stand because I am female and therefore suspect, furtive, unruly. I think sometimes there is something of Arendt or Sontag or the moon in me, but also every woman I see begging in the street. The uncertainty of me driving a hot spark into the center of my solar plexus, such that I cannot tell the difference between failure and illness. Capital milks its stress of cortisol to grow a horror in the body. It finds us all. Time knows what it does or it doesn't. Is it truly a sequence that is continuing? I might suck time from the ridge of your lips. I think the city negates me. Yes and no. The mess I've made of things. I'm given to the question mark, the ellipsis. The future has already happened and I understand nothing. A child cries on the street and the mother answers, I don't care. Another woman walking past an expensive spandex says into her phone, whatever I have risked, I stand to earn. I cannot hunt. I lock the door when you go away with my love. And with fern in hand, I signal recalcitrance. I am bogged. A pustule of glial shine. It is possible the rest has ended. I brought the vena cava as far as postponing the present. Here is the list, the date, the face, the hour. Soft privilege. I miss my ever so refined, concomitant contour kit. Breath became a danger set in endocrine relief, a sweet antiquity outside of sin. Modest head, who has yet to pilfer your coffers? Stonewall green as any word when I awake, and the popcorn ceiling is a testimony I can't understand. At work, a superconducting magnet lolls in its hull below the hospital. I get lost and encounter an elderly patient in a wheelchair screaming help, while the last fissure of my skull closes its account. I dream of places I have lived before, in which I am an unremarkable agent. Every screen is a stun gun, a spent stud. I scroll as from the atopos of a lobotomy. At night, I place a pressed note of melatonin under my soul and pray for a repeat. The day was disinterested in me. I can't simply be the secretary of this contagion that loosed me upon the world with so many holes that must be probed and assessed for progress. I can't offer my recent kill as a solvent or antidote. I could take your mouth as I can't help but take your mouth out of the stillborn word and render it a new communion. Am I a disaster about my nerves, outside of you, waiting for my humors to run clear, a colonial notion, so said my affection, a lining of greenery within the posture. Late summer, I swing it like the spirit that comes out of my mouth, the aggregate of my mouth, a sit-in. I am congregating in an alcove, an achronological history of tones, as if I already knew the answer. Purchased the derivative, the transform, all sinusoidal descriptions of mercenary light. The description that exits me is not truth, but surface. Can I spend the night? Can I spend the whole surface in one night? Do I intend an extended meditation on the impossibility of object relations so late in the game? The lesser pox that rests in me a deep, cold water lake. All the skins of fibrous silk, of nerve stimulus, wedded to infinity. The sky has a nickel sheen. False rapids and birch and bottle caps in an old code of surety. I dreamt supernatural and killed my memories with salt. I mined a silken nerve, I mined the woods. When your hand crested the iliac of my hip and took up this branch, a whip of lilac, the jurisdiction of my heart, a fall of red clovers all over the township. Let this dark summer displace the original hour of our mutual birth, what reappears here, the night I crossed out. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
In addition to thanking Liz, I would also like to thank the Canada Council for the Arts who have made her tour possible. And I would also like to thank Trini Finley at the University of New Brunswick for organizing this tour. Now this is the special mic that doesn't sound like I'm miking anything, but it's all going into the videotape. So questions, and I will race around and give you the mic. Anyone have any questions?
Hello. So your work is super powerful.
Thank you.
And has a lot of like really thought-provoking content. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the process. You mentioned your piece written originally like as a letter and then adapted into a poem. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what that process is like going from a letter to poetry, as those are very different writing styles. I was wondering if you could tell us about how you adapted that.
I suppose I was writing to a friend who was also a writer, and so the correspondence that I had with this person was kind of pseudo-literary to begin with, and then once I sort of figured out the style in which I had written to them, I found it was easy to kind of whittle away at it, and also just I allowed myself to be more. There must be better language for this, but forgive me for failing in that way in this moment. But to be more plain spoken, and to not having to turn the dial to 11 all the time, and use all these sort of linguistic tricks that I always loved to do, and use all these like science terms and just, to really amp up the musical play in every line, in terms of its density, and just letting the kind of the beauty of direct speech sort of work, just sort of work on myself, just in the form of of a letter, or just like talking to a friend, the intimacy of it. But really, I didn't know if it was any good at all. It was something that I just kind of played with. I knew that the intensity was there in that piece because of the subject matter. And I didn't really know if it was going to mean anything to anyone else. And I had this person, Rob McLennan, who runs this blog where I think it's like a weekly thing. This site called Ducey. He publishes weekly poems, and he'd been hounding me for months to give him something, and so I had been playing around with cutting this letter up into lines, and I just, on a whim, said, here, publish out of frustration. I just said, publish this, thinking no one would probably see it. And then a lot of people saw it and wrote to me. And then that gave me confidence to write in this more letter like there's a term for this style of writing that is also escaping me, but a letter-like style. Epistolary style. So it's the process of just going for intimacy. So of writing, just writing, actually writing as if actually addressing a person, and then playing around, and then playing with line breaks, and in doing that also reading a lot of other poets who work in that medium as well. So great people to read are like any of the New York School of Poets, New York School, like Eileen Miles is an excellent example of that. Frank O'Hara, Jimmy Schuyler. I hope that approaches some answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, my student and I read Lee Maricle's Celia's Song. And in this novel, or in this text, there's a chapter that clearly satirizes Western science, let's put it this way. So I was reading your text earlier, and I was listening to your reading, and I was wondering, without ascribing any meaning, preconception of what you're doing with scientific terms, you began to refer to that earlier. What is the role of those scientific terms in your poetry, or you perhaps prefer not to say, but I have the feeling that they play various roles. Obviously, they speak to your training, but is there more to it?
My usual answer to this question is that these are words that are ricocheting around in my brain at any given time because they are from my training. They're from my education. Whereas, like, say a person, who, even if they are self-taught, like through their own self-guided, reading practice or whatever, or from academic study, say, they're a humanities person or an English person, they're going to have their own set of references and terminology to draw from. Mine is psychological science and biology, and some of my other concerns kind of branch out from there. So I would say for the most part, those words come up because I'm so interested in them. But also, yeah, I would say that that's the case. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you weave them with other sets of terms, right? Mm-hmm. Which I find very interesting. They stand out, but they don't. They also combine with mm-hmm. other types of vocabulary.
Yeah, and there's also, in my book, there's a lot of questioning and reflexivity onto everything. Everything is sort of called into questioning, and everything is sort of bounced off of everything else. So there's this interplay between various forms, in between various registers, and in between various systems of how the world is, we know it, or how knowledge systems are framed, either scientifically or spiritually or some combination thereof.
And if I may add also this reflection, so I don't know if it's combined, but reflection on pain.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Liz. That was phenomenal to experience and listen to. You had mentioned that your later work was a certain way, and then there was a transition into the newer stuff that you were reading for us. And as a listener, there was an obvious distinction. For the first poems, I felt almost like I was witnessing something otherworldly and huge, whereas with your newer poems, I felt like I was experiencing something more familiar and personal. So I was wondering what had caused that transition. Was it conscious, or your writing it adapted over time, or did something sort of trigger that change?
Wanting to challenge myself, wanting to experiment, and wanting to be more vulnerable, wanting to be more direct. Yeah.
Well, both styles were incredibly beautiful, but there was a clear distinction between the two, and both were lovely, but just such a different sensation for both. So, Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering what your first poem was about, the Terra Nova one.
It's about, and part of it's sort of like about something that we kind of talked about in dinner. At dinner, sort of like the ridiculousness of trying to terraform Mars rather than sort of put an end to exploitative capitalism and resource extraction. And also, there's just several different elements going on in the poem, sort of about archaeology and cosmology, and there's a lot of different things going on. And of course, it's not necessarily entirely up for me to say what it is about. The reader also participates.
Any other questions? Are you all participating?
Just wondering, can you tell us what you're working on right now? Are you thinking of another collection of poems, or Or is it just one poem at a time?
I'm working on another manuscript of poems.
Hi, were you always interested in poems, or did that, suddenly happen?
I started writing. I started writing at a fairly young age. Obviously, I studied poetry in school, and through a series of strange events, I encountered an old copy of Macbeth by Shakespeare as a young child, and I became very enamored of it. And that led to reading a lot of poetry. And then I started writing my own poetry. But it wasn't until I graduated university and started taking poetry workshops and reading on open mics and meeting other weirdo poets and hanging out with them and writing with them that I started really trying to publish poems in little magazines and stuff like that.
And while I pass the mic, I will say that there are also books available from the Box of Delights at the back.
Wait. After listening to your poems, and our drive down to Wolfville, Acadia, and supper, and the two lovely people that we had dinner with, Dr. Alexander and Dr. Weil. The question is, to me, like in your poet, is that like a form of antidote for healing within ourselves, and hope that other people will see it and it could generate some kind of releasing information or putting on paper?
Yeah.
As I told you on our way down, I did one poem, and that was the first and last one because the woman started crying. Was involved in a very serious incident. So I never wrote no more, but we broke up and I married somebody else. No, I was just kidding. No, but that poem was an antidote for me.
Yeah.
It helped me to heal a little bit.
Yeah.
And not only me, I kind of feel bad, but then again, that poem wasn't for me. But with yours, it's almost like an antidote for people to experience what you do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's
paper.
totally. It is. It is profoundly therapeutic for me. Yeah. So I absolutely have to write. To feel, I don't know, to feel sane, I have to write. And I also write, and I want to continue to write, because there's this hope that, that I can't be the only one who's gone through things like this, or that feels the way that I feel, or thinks the way that I think. And I feel that it sounds so cliche, but it's really true. It's like if I could, that, because like when I was really young, and I went through an exceptionally difficult time when I was a young person, like 12, 13 years old, and poetry, like reading poetry, really opened up my world, really. And helped me with really difficult feelings and thoughts and impulses and whatnot that I had. And if something that I put out there into the world, if I could do a similar thing, give that back, then it's then I've been of service in some way, right? That's I don't know. That's a big part. That's a big part of it for me. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to decide that we have heard a lot, and there's just a lot in this space at this moment, and it's nice to hold it. And I have also really appreciated those silent moments as you were deciding how to deal with these questions.
Oh, yeah.
Some of which I'm sure
Sorry, I'm a little,
are
sort of, I
familiar,
feel like
but
a
also, yeah,
burnt out light bulb a little bit.
well,
so
but,
forgive me.
I mean, I think also as you shared at supper, there's a huge story, and if you get started, and maybe you don't have the energy to start that story right now too, and so there are all these things, and those are very much, I think, they're very densely in your poems. So I had a great time reading countless interviews and reviews of Liz's book, and many of her poems are also online as well as in these journals, and I really encourage you to read the book over and over and over again. I'll also just share that I read a poem to Elder Joe Michael a few days ago, and just kind of, I read it to him. It was Think Tent.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was another elder who does the shaking tent
Oh, yeah.
ceremony who was thinking of coming. I said, well, it's not quite that, but anyway, here's this poem. And he just said, oh, I'll tell you what I think of this poem. And he just launched into a long discussion of the poem. And he said, and so what do you think? I said, I think I need to read it another 20 times. Because and then I just realized, oh yeah, I'm all English prof over this. I just look at this line, my head is exploding, and there's so much in there. But yeah, also a kind of, I'm not really sure what this is, and that's partly what I love about it. And I think that's the work that we all need to do, and we just need to thank you for writing. Yes, you and many others for putting this out there, and it's up to us to rise to the challenge. So I have a little gift of poetry for you.
Oh, thank you.
You all clap. This is a little Mi'kmaq
Thank
gift
you.
of poetry.
Thank you very much. Thank
Ellen
you.
Jo Mike, I really tried to take the top of Katie's pie, but it wasn't possible. So someone else will have to organize.
Oh, yeah.
So would you like books?